A Girl Named Helen by Bonnie Batter. A Girl Named Helen. Chapter 1, Changes. On June 27, 1880, a healthy baby girl was born in Tuscumbia, Alabama. Her parents, Arthur and Kate Keller, named her Helen. Helen's family loved her very much. She was a fun and beautiful baby, and she was very smart. By 6 months, Helen could say a few words, tea and wawa, which meant water. At the age of 1, Helen started to walk. When Helen was about a year and a half old, she got a very high fever. Helen's doctor was not sure what was wrong with her. He called her sickness, quote-unquote, brain fever. For several days, her parents thought she might die. Then her fever went away. Her family was relieved. Later, Helen's mother passed her hands in front of Ellen's face. Helen just stared straight ahead. She couldn't see a thing. When the bell rang for dinner, Helen couldn't hear the sound. Not only was Helen blind, she was deaf, too. Helen's parents took her to see a doctor, but he said there was nothing he could do to help. Helen Keller's world was now dark and silent. Chapter 2, Learning to Communicate. Most children learn to speak by listening and watching others talk. Helen could not speak. Helen could not listen. She could not watch. Therefore, she could not speak. But that did not stop little Helen from exploring and noticing the world around her. She followed her mother around wherever she went by holding on to her skirts. She sniffed the air for different smells. She felt vibrations when people moved. In those days, there were hardly any schools for deaf and blind children in the entire United States. But Helen began to figure out her own ways to communicate. When she pulled someone, it meant come. When she pushed someone, it meant go. Still, Helen couldn't always express herself in a way that was easy for others to understand. When she couldn't communicate her thoughts, she would get angry. Helen would kick and scream, and it was hard for her parents to control her. When Helen had her temper under control, she loved to explore the garden. She learned to tell the plants apart just by their smell and feel. Helen also spent time with her dog, Belle. Helen tried teaching Belle her signs, but Belle never caught on. She was more interested in chasing the birds in the garden. When Helen was 5, she got a big surprise. A baby sister named Mildred. Helen was jealous of all the attention her sister got. One day she tipped over the cradle while Mildred was in it. Luckily, Mildred was not hurt. However, it was clear that Helen's anger could hurt herself and others. Helen's parents felt sure she would become less frustrated if she learned how to communicate better. In Washington, D.C., the Kellers met with Dr. Alexander Graham Bell. When Helen walked into Dr. Bell's office with her parents, she climbed right up into the doctor's lap. Dr. Bell suggested that the Kellers write to the Perkins Institution for the Blind in Boston, Massachusetts, and ask if they had a teacher for Helen. Chapter 3, A Teacher Arrives. On March 3, 1887, 6-year-old Helen stood outside on her porch. She felt the vibrations of a horse-drawn carriage coming closer and closer. The carriage stopped, and Helen held out her arms, expecting her mother, but instead she touched a stranger. Helen did not like strangers, but she was curious. Who was this new person? It was Anne Sullivan, a 20-year-old recent graduate of the Perkins Institution. She would live with the Kellers as Helen's teacher. The next morning, as Helen helped Anne unpack her bags, Helen found a doll. Anne took Helen's hand and spelled out the letters for the word doll on her palm. Helen thought the doll now belonged to her. When Anne took back the doll, Helen had a temper tantrum. Anne tried to calm her down, but Helen just grew more and more angry. Helen and her teacher were not off to a good start. Helen's temper tantrums continued. One day, Helen tried to eat food from Anne's plate. When Anne stopped her, Helen became furious. She kicked and screamed. She refused to use a spoon to eat her own food. Everything with Helen was a battle. The Kellers tried to help, but Anne realized the best thing to do was to get Helen away from her family so she could focus. Anne and Helen would live in the cottage that was near the main house.